Thank you all for being here again this morning. I am Bob Castro. I'm a retired pastor, currently serving in an half-time interim role in northwestern Illinois. I have been a pastor for just over 21 years, and I have worked with a colleague who is now fully retired by the name of Jim Valentine, who was the head of an organization called Christian Apologetics Research Information Service, or CARIS. Jim is an expert in cults and world religions, and I've had the blessing and the honor of speaking with him, both in the United States and in the country of Latvia in Northern Europe that we serve together. So what we decided to do is a presentation on the doctrines of different world religions. And the point of the handout that you have is a point that I made last week, but I wanted to illustrate, and that point is this. Every major religion in the world today believes in Jesus. You need to get that. And I was just talking to Michelle, and we talked about the fact that our children and grandchildren need to get that. That every religion in the world today, major religion in the world today, believes in Jesus. So the question, when someone tells you, which they do, that, well, we believe in Jesus, they've told you absolutely nothing. Because that's not the question. The question is, please share with me what you believe about Jesus. So last week we did Islam, Mohammedanism, Muslims. And this morning we're going to look at the Mormon Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And one of the reasons we did it in that order is because one of the things that's really interesting are the similarities between Islam and Mormonism. Something that you wouldn't even think about. And I have a Missouri Synod Lutheran friend and colleague by the name of Hans Feeney, who was in north central Illinois and now is in the St. Louis area, who does a production on YouTube called Lutheran Satire. Very creative. He's really good. And in fact, I had several of them queued up on YouTube for Mormonism and Jehovah's Witnesses that he's done. And one of the presentations that I was thinking about, his production on this was really low level, and the points that he was making were really good, so I didn't use it. But basically what he does in the presentation, his tagline is teaching the faith by making fun of stuff. It's satire. And he does this presentation comparing from the books Islam and Mormonism, Quran and Book of Mormon, and it's really astounding. And so I've got a couple in my outline. I've got the word familiar with a question mark a couple times to remind myself, to remind you that this is just what we said last week when we were talking about Islam. It's very interesting. So I began last week with a couple stories, and I want to do that again because what we're looking at is we're answering the question, why do we care? It's not a big deal. I mean, this is America. You can believe whatever you want. I mean, this is not just the greatest country in the world. This is the greatest country in the history of the world. I mean, you can believe whatever you want. That's not the issue. The issue is sheep stealing. The issue is when you come at our people. That's the issue. Not, just believe whatever you want. And so that's where this becomes important. And my wife, Anita, had the opportunity to go to Salt Lake City, Utah. And when she did, she went to the Visitors Center at the Mormon Temple in Salt Lake City, Utah. And she got their pitch. And she shared their pitch with me. Now, she wasn't able to tour the heart of the temple because what the Mormon Church does when they open a temple is they have a 2-week tour period where anybody can tour the entire temple. And then after that 2 weeks, they close off the center and only Mormons are allowed in, but they have a visitor center. So Anita went to the visitor center and she heard the pitch. We are just another Christian denomination. Our Christian denomination is better than your Christian denomination because we have a temple. You don't have a temple. We have a temple. So you should join our Christian denomination. And the reason we're doing this today is we're going to walk through all of the doctrines of Mormonism that conflict with the biblical understanding of Jesus Christ, who God is and who we are in God. But that's the pitch. And the reason that matters today is that is the very same pitch that the Jehovah's Witnesses give. Almost word for word. Except instead of a temple, they have the Jehovah. In Seventh-day Adventists, instead of a temple or Jehovah, they have end-time prophecy. So it's all, we have a better Christian denomination than the one you're in because fill in the blank. What fills in the blank is different, but the pitch is exactly the same in each case. So in 2006, in the summer, Jim Valentine, my colleague and teammate and friend, goes to every temple opening in the United States. He can't make them to every temple opening in the world, although he's been to several overseas. And they opened a temple in Sacramento, California. And Jim's wife put out an alert to his people that several of his team had canceled and he was shorthanded. Could anybody get to Sacramento? Well, I had just started a new call, but it was summer, so it was relatively light. And, as God would have it, my sister and her husband and kids live in Sacramento, California, and I had never been there to visit. So I was on a plane to Sacramento, California. And I knew, because Jim had taught me, that I was going to get a step-for-step tour of the new temple in Sacramento. So my sister dropped me off at Jim's information table at the foot of the hill upon which the temple sits. And I dropped off my stuff, grabbed my book bag, and started up the hill. Well, as soon as they saw me walking, they, being the security, realized he's not driving into the parking lot. And they immediately came, two of them, one on each side of me, and searched my bag. Because they figured I was with the guy at the bottom of the hill for the information table. And of course they weren't wrong. But I was not imprudent enough to put dumb enough to put any of Jim's stuff in my bag. That wasn't the point. So they searched my bag and it was clean, and I went on the tour. The two things that struck me on the tour of the temple, which we'll talk about in detail, is the eternal nuclear family, which we'll talk about what that means and why, and baptism for the dead. Those were the two things that stuck in my mind and still stick in my mind today from 2006 that were big pushes for them when they were sharing their temple with people that were not Mormons. Eternal nuclear family, I stress nuclear, and baptism for the dead. So I was talking to Michelle about the youth pilgrimage that we had done several years ago. And one of the stops was a Mormon worship space. Because Mormonism has patterned itself after Old Testament Judaism in many respects, I refer to them for convenience purposes as synagogues. They don't call them that, but they have their temples and then they have their local worship space. So call it whatever you want. But in Judaism, they had the temple and then they had their local synagogue. So that's how I refer to it. And we had the opportunity to do that, to go and speak with a Mormon leader in the worship space about Mormonism. That was one of our stops. So the reason this is important again today is that these are the people that are knocking on your door. And that's why next week we're going to look at Jehovah's Witnesses. The reason this matters is they're knocking on your door. I mean, we don't really have Hare Krishnas running around bald anymore in robes. So it's not like you're going to face them very often. But the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses, my daughter just got a letter from the Jehovah's Witnesses to warn her that they're coming. Now that COVID is let up, they basically told her, we're coming, expect to knock on the door. So they're coming. Quick reminder, this is a principle. Every American heresy started as a house church outside of organized religion. That's why I don't believe personally in anti-clericalism. Anti-clericalism is A, we don't need a pastor. We can read the Bible for ourselves. How's that working out? And then B, we don't need organized religion. It's me and Jesus, me and God. And I don't believe that because historically we know that every American heresy started out as a house church, outside of organized religion. And then as I reminded you just now, every major world religion today believes in Jesus. So that's the handout, who do you say that I am? So I covered those for you. So what I want to do is briefly summarize the materials I brought. Books first. This is the Quran and the Bible. Comparison, side-by-side comparison to the teachings of the Quran and the Bible. All of this comes from my colleague Jim Valentine. This is the encyclopedia that I'm using as a reference. It's the Encyclopedia Dictionary of Cults and World Religions. This is what I'm using for note preparation. It's really very, very thorough. These are little pamphlets that Jim has shared, the truth about Mormonism. And then I have a copy of the Book of Mormon, which I confess I've never read. And what I have read is the book, The Mormon Illusion, which talks very specifically about Mormonism in the Bible. And I have some DVDs that are really good. This one, Lifting the Veil of Polygamy, basically demonstrates that some of the, and we know this now from reality television, some of the sects of, or splinter groups from Mormonism are still practicing secret polygamy today. So that's basically what this is about, is polygamy. And remember, that's how Islam started. In Islam, a man could have any number of wives, but a wife could only have one husband. It's the same thing that we see in Mormonism. And the two that are really excellent, this is the Bible and the Book of Mormon. So we're going to talk about archaeology today. And this is DNA and the Book of Mormon. So I almost can't say trust the science anymore with a straight face because of our media. But this is basically trusting the science. Genetic markers and the Book of Mormon. So we'll talk about that when we look. And this is a really good summary of all of it. And I have copies of this. So if anyone wants to if anyone still has a DVD player or Blu-ray player, then you're welcome to borrow this because this is for distribution purposes. This summarizes all of this material in one thing. So it's really good in that respect. So we have to do the history of Mormonism, of course, is primarily the history of Joseph Smith. So we'll start with his early life. Joseph Smith's father was a struggling farmer who failed in one farm, moved, and then failed in another farm. He just couldn't make farming work. So what Joseph Smith's father taught him was divining for buried treasure. This is all true. I mean, it's like, when I was putting this together today, I almost wanted to say you can't make this stuff up, but of course that's our point, is you can make this stuff up. So he was actually, Joseph Smith, when he became an adult and was practicing this, was actually arrested for fraud in using this method to divine buried treasure. So I'm going to show you the method. I brought my props with me today. The way you find buried treasure is you take your seeing stone and you put your seeing stone in the hat. And then it's very important that you put your face far enough into the hat that you block the light so you only see the seeing stone. And that tells you where the buried treasure is. He got thrown in jail for this. At 14, he became very concerned about his soul. Now we have the history of Joseph Smith related to you by Joseph Smith. His own memoirs. At age 14, he at his own writing, became very concerned about his spiritual situation, and he began checking out Christian denominations to see which one he liked best. And the more denominations he checked out, the more confused he became. So, he went into the woods by himself to meditate, contemplate, and pray. Now, there should be a ding that goes off. Muhammad went into the desert to a cave to sit and meditate and contemplate and pray. So ding number one. As he was praying, he had in 1820 what is referred to as his first vision. There are several versions of this. The vision that they like best, the version that they like best of this happened in upstate New York. The version that they like best is, he saw God the Father and God the Son appear before him as two men to tell him that none of the denominations were Christian, that Christianity ended with the death of the apostles. And I just learned this from Hans. I say the death of the apostles, but apparently Mormonism teaches that the Apostle John never died. The Apostle John's still alive in the world. Why? Because in chapter 21, right, Peter is on the beach walking with Jesus, and Peter turns around and says of John, what about this guy? And Jesus says, that's none of your business. If he's to remain until I return, then that's up to us. That's not up to you. And the rumor went around that John would not die before Jesus came back. John never supported that, but that was the rumor. So the Mormon Church, that God the Father as a man told Joseph Smith that John was still alive. So the other apostles died, other than John, and the Christian faith was lost, and now God the Father and God the Son had come to Joseph Smith to share with him the true Christian faith, the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints. So that was the first vision. And the problem with this is that over the years, Mormons have said that the first vision was from the Angel Moroni. Others have said the first vision was of the angel Nephi. So there's multiple stories in Mormonism regarding what the first vision actually was. Now, the second vision occurs 3 years later in 1823, and everybody agrees that this is the Angel Moroni. The Angel Moroni appeared and said, what you need to reestablish faith in Jesus Christ is going to be written on golden tablets. And we're going to give you the golden tablets when you're spiritually mature enough. And you're going to be given the ability to translate the golden tablets into what the world needs to know about the true religion of Jesus Christ. And it took 4 years of ongoing visions before he finally had a vision of Moroni coming back to him with the tablets, gold tablets. I mentioned last week that one of the things Jim shares, which is important for what I call the benefit of the doubt, is that the tablets probably weighed over 100 pounds each if they were as described. And one of the stories that he relates is sprinting through the woods, chased by persecutors with one under each arm. And Jim's point is, no. Nobody carries 100 pounds under one arm, and if you are, you're not sprinting. Very unlikely. Jim in his presentation points out that no one has ever witnessed the golden tablets. No one ever witnessed the golden tablets. Now, in my research, I found out that there were people that had claimed to have seen the golden tablets, but on closer examination said, no, we saw the transcript that was made from the gold tablets. They never actually saw the gold tablets. And as we're talking about what I call the benefit of the doubt, that becomes really important. So what Joseph Smith was given the ability to do was translate the golden tablets into English. And the way he did that was, as he was given the translation, he dictated it to someone who wrote it down. So first he transcribed exactly what appeared on the tablets on paper. So now he has the characters on paper. And then he translates that to a transcriber from the paper, not the tablets. And so can anybody guess how he translates it? Anybody got a guess? You can't make this stuff up. So this is how he translates the golden tablets. True story. And he's telling him what the words are. You must be crazy. Are you kidding me? That's how he translates the golden tablets. The hat and the stone. Okay, quick side story. Jim and I, this will be important for Scientology if we talk about Scientology as well. Jim and I are doing a presentation in Latvia for the Latvian National Lutheran Church, New Age and Neo-Gnosticism. Neo-Gnosticism is the Da Vinci Code, okay? That's Neo-Gnosticism. So we're doing this presentation, and the women of the National Lutheran Church ask us to come and do the presentation for them, which we do. That evening, they have another presenter after us. He's a psychologist, and his presentation is all in Latvian, but we kept our translator with us, so she translated his presentation. So here's his presentation. A study was done, and in the study, they told a group of people a story that they made up. And almost to a person, they believed them. And so part of the study was, it's like, okay, we need to up the ante. So they made the story more outrageous. And the next group of people believed them. So, oh man, okay. So they made the story more outrageous, and the next group of people believed them. It took multiple steps before they finally could come up with something that caused somebody to say, wait a minute, that can't be true. The gullibility index of the human being was off the chart. Okay? Now, the reason that's good to know is he's translating out of a hat with a stone, and nobody thinks that's a problem. Why are there so many world religions? Because the gullibility of the human being is off the chart. So what I shared with Michelle is, when we're working with young people, one of the things I teach them in confirmation is, look, please understand, write it down. It's not true because I believe it. I believe it because it's true. And that makes all the difference. So, so I'm trying to keep a straight face. I promise. In 1829, John the Baptist appears to Joseph Smith and his second in command to ordain them into the ministry of the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints. They're ordained by John the Baptist. Setting aside for the moment that God absolutely forbids, on pain of death, conversing with dead people. even if it were true that took place, God forbids on penalty of death conversing with dead people. So the answer is no. A, that wasn't John the Baptist, if it happened at all.
Where in the Bible is that?
Old Testament. There's like a whole list. It's in Leviticus. It's in Deuteronomy. It's basically all forms of magic. I actually made a list. I wanted, because of the Harry Potter thing, I wanted to make a list of all the places in the Bible that talked about magic. They're almost all in the Old Testament, not all, but almost all. And it lists all the things that are considered an abomination by God. Speaking to dead people is one of them. It's spiritism, mediums, that's what that basically is. So John the Baptist, who's dead, supposedly appeared to Joseph Smith to ordain them in 1829. So Mormonism is founded in 1830. 14 years later, Joseph Smith is dead. He's arrested because of polygamy. Because what we're going to talk about a little bit is continuing revelation, ongoing direct revelation. So he's continuing to get messages through this whole time, like Muhammad. And he gets a message that God wants us as men to have multiple wives. He had 20. His successor, Brigham Young, had 27 wives. And we'll talk about why that is. But people became understandably upset. And Mormons were horribly persecuted. And he was arrested on federal polygamy charges and murdered in the jail in Illinois in 1844. After only 14 years of Mormon Church existing. Not surprisingly, there's immediately a dispute over his successor, which of course is exactly what happened in Islam when Muhammad died. And the person who won in that contest was Brigham Young. And it's Brigham Young who then brings the main group of Mormons to Salt Lake City in Utah. The splinter groups stay behind. One splinter group is led by Joseph Smith's son and his actual legitimate first wife. Stay in Illinois and do a splinter group. Then there's another splinter group by someone else who claimed that they should be the prophet. And so there's a couple of splinter groups, and those splinter groups are still around. That's why even after polygamy is abandoned by the church in Salt Lake City, it continues because it goes on in the splinter groups illegally. So let's look at doctrines. First, the doctrine of God, of course. God was formerly a man with a physical body. So how anybody could think this is a Christian denomination? God was formerly a man with a physical body, and what Mormons say about that is, as we are now, God once was. As God now is, we will become. Why is Mormonism attractive to people? I'm going to be God. Why is New Age attractive to people? I'm already God. Why is Scientology attractive to people? Tom Cruise. Why do I always forget his name? Vinny Barbarino. Anyway. John Travolta, Tom Cruise, right? Why? Because we're going to make you an ascended spiritual being. That's what Scientology is. We're going to make you into a spiritual avatar. It's pride. You will be like God. We remember that from Genesis chapter 3. You will be like God. And so we become gods. So in Mormonism, God the Father isn't the eternal one. God the Father is the God who is in charge of this planet. God the Father had a God, through whom God the Father became a God and was assigned this planet. So as a Mormon man, when I die in good graces, God the Father, it just, stuff comes to my brain. My brain makes connections. Just this second, I swear, true story. It's a pyramid scheme. How do pyramids work? That's exactly how pyramids work. Go out and get 10 people to sell the thing, and then you get their money that your 10 people are selling, and then they'll get 10 people. It's a pyramid. So we become gods, and then when we become gods, then we have our own planet and our own people that we become in charge of to elevate them to godness. And of course, but that's of course if you're male. If you're female, then you enter heaven through the marriage to your husband. Only males get to be gods. Now, you have a spiritual wife. She becomes your spiritual wife. And we'll talk more about that. So there are innumerable gods in Mormonism. Jesus spiritually came into being through the mating of God the Father and God the Father's spiritual wife. Jesus came to earth through the mating of God the Father and Mary. Copulated. And that is how Jesus is produced inside of her. So, one of the things I've shared that's, when we talk about being gender neutral and all this stuff, is that God the Father is spirit, okay? God the Father is not male. Male is a biological designation to a created entity. God the Father is spirit. God the Father is not male, unless you're Mormon. If you're Mormon, God the Father is male and appeared as male to Joseph Smith. So Jesus came into being spiritually. Now, Jesus has a little brother. Spiritually, not on earth. On earth, his little brother is James. Spiritually, his little brother is Lucifer. Jesus is firstborn, Lucifer is secondborn. And so God the Father, who has a God over him, decides how to redeem this planet, because you don't redeem the whole universe, because we're up to our eyeballs in gods. And so he has to choose a redeemer. So he chooses Jesus, and Lucifer gets upset that it wasn't him, and Lucifer rebels. That's the story of the rebellion. Jesus is born as a human and attains God's status on earth. And the reason that's important to a Mormon is Jesus teaches and enables us to attain God's status. Following Jesus does that. So let's talk about, the heading I used was women, family, blacks, and Native Americans. Women attain heaven through earthly marriage to a Mormon and through Mormon baptism. I'm skipping to 4. Blacks are cursed by God and cannot enter into the celestial heaven. But they can enter into the terrestrial heaven and avoid the telestial heaven. So what I've just shared with you is there are 3 layers of heaven in Mormonism. Celestial for the saints, terrestrial for the not so much, and telestial for the cursed. But if blacks believe, they can make it to the terrestrial heaven, but they can't make it to the celestial heaven until 1978. Why? Because we want to do mission work in Africa. And we can't go into Africa and teach this. So we had an ongoing direct revelation that now in 1978, blacks can make it into the celestial heaven. Women can make it into the celestial heaven without being married to Mormon men and being Mormon baptized. Why? Because we need that to be true. I call it doing theology backwards. And there are religious groups that do theology backwards. So in each of these cases, what we're looking at is ongoing direct revelation. So, and a good example of that is polygamy. Polygamy, prior to 1978, is evangelism. Women get to the celestial realm by being married to a Mormon man. The more wives you marry, the more evangelism you do to bring women into heaven. So the more wives you have, the better. Because you are using marriage as evangelism to bring all these women with you into heaven, one of which will be your spiritual wife. And then, in 1920, ongoing direct revelation, God says polygamy is bad. Now, ongoing direct revelation, if we had more time, I would talk about the distinction between what's called progressive revelation and ongoing direct revelation. Very briefly, progressive revelation is how we understand God's will based upon the scriptures we already have. Ongoing direct revelation is this is new from God and it can contradict everything that's come before. That's a huge distinction, right? Slavery is bad. Progressive revelation. Women can be ordained. Progressive revelation. We get it from Scripture. We don't simply change our minds regarding what is in Scripture. So the nuclear family. Nuclear family first. The nuclear family continues through eternity. This is a huge deal. When I took the tour in Sacramento, we took us into a room and they showed us this testimony of all these people that converted to Mormonism because they had such a wonderful feeling to know that they were going to be with their families through all eternity. If we take a moment to reflect, which is what I want to try to do, that's silly. Am I a son, a father, or a grandfather? Which am I? Right? If I'm with my dad's nuclear family, I can't be the father in my nuclear family. It doesn't work. And 30 seconds of thought will show you that it doesn't work. They have millions of converts based solely on the doctrine of eternal nuclear family. It's impossible. Now, we'll all be at the feet of Jesus. I get that. And you can make the argument, well, we'll all be together. I get that. But that's not what the doctrine is. The doctrine is we will be together as Bob, Anita, Rebecca, and Tim through all eternity. Well, what about Bridget and Callie? What about Jamie? It's just...
But don't they get each of them get their own planets?
Well, yeah, but that's the other thing. If Tim's with me, how does he get his own planet? Tim's with me.
And maybe their planets are close together so they can...
I mean, maybe. I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, the other point of that is, how's Jamie, my grandson, going to get his own planet if he's with Tim? How's Tim going to get his planet if Tim's with me? And how's Tim going to be with me if Tim's with Jamie? It's just silly. And sometimes we can say that. It's okay to say, take a minute and reflect on how silly that is. Now, Native Americans. The Book of Mormon teaches that the Native American tribes are, in fact, the 10 lost tribes of Israel. What happened historically is there was a civil war in Israel and it split into two countries, like North Vietnam, South Vietnam, North Korea, South Korea. It split. North was called Israel, there were 10 tribes. South was called Judah, there were 2 tribes. And they all turned against God, and God warned them that they were going to be carried away into slavery. And the northern 10 tribes were carried off into Assyria, and never returned as tribes, individuals did. The 2 tribes in Judah were carried off to Babylon, and the history of the taught in the Bible is they came back. By the way, which is why Jews hate Samaritans, because Samaritan was the old Israel. That's why Jews hate Samaritans in the New Testament. So there's 10 lost tribes that have never come back together on earth as the 10 lost tribes. And Joseph Smith tells us why. Because they got on a boat and they came to the Americas. They became the Native Americans because of the curse of God, because that was part of the curse. So what they did, where is everything? So Mormon geneticists checked the genetic markers for the Hebrew people, Semitic. And they checked the genetic markers for the Asians of Siberia. The theory being that the Native American people came across the Bering Strait when it was land, and that they are from the Siberian region of what is Russia, from the Arctic Circle. And according to the Book of Mormon, the American natives should have genetic markers from Hebrews, Semitics. To no one's surprise, the American natives have all the genetic markers of the Northern Asiatic Russian people, and none of the markers of the Semitic people of the East. And that's what this video is. It proves that the Book of Mormon is made up. Well, how could he do that? Well, how does he know that we're going to be able to... He doesn't know what a cell is. He doesn't know that we're going to look at DNA when he wrote this. He figures he's perfectly safe. No one's ever going to know. I love science. I am not anti-science. I love science. Science is great. And so now I want to talk about the other one, which is archaeology. And this relates to the question of benefit of the doubt. I shared last week. My initial position was, because I know from the Bible that Satan can appear as an angel of light. I know that angels can come and give a false gospel. Paul taught us that. So the benefit of the doubt is that something appeared to Muhammad in the desert that looked like an angel, and he was deceived. The benefit of the doubt is that something appeared to Joseph Smith in New York as an angel, and Joseph Smith was deceived. So what Jim has shown me over the years is all of the evidence of fabrication removes that benefit of the doubt. And so what we're talking about is archaeology. In the video, it's great. They interview a guy from the Smithsonian Institute. And it's all interviews, video interviews. And they ask him, so is there any archaeological evidence to support the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament? And the guy kind of chuckles and said, well, how much time do you have? I mean, I could be with you here all day, relating to the archaeological evidence that's been discovered for the Old and New Testament. And so then the interviewer says, okay, well, can you tell us what archaeological evidence there is for the Book of Mormon? He starts laughing on film. And he goes, no, why would you expect any? The Book of Mormon takes place on the North American and South American continent, and they have never found a single city referred to in the book, not one. No archaeological, no foundations, no buildings, no cities, no nothing. The one thing they had was a major battle that took place in upstate New York in the Book of Mormon, with natives being involved. And they had like swords and stuff. And so the archaeologists went to New York to look for the artifacts, the swords and shields that were dropped by the dead people, the bones, the weapons. Nothing. And so how does the Mormon Church respond? They bought the land and closed it off, barring all archaeological surveys of the area, which prior to that had shown nothing. So the point being, Jim's point being, and Angel probably would have not gotten that wrong, it is more likely that Joseph Smith and Muhammad made it up. Why? Muhammad needed to gather all these split tribes that were all fighting against each other into one unified force. And he did that. He accomplished it through Islam. Joseph Smith needed to found a world religion with him being in charge. And he did that. There was motive for them to make it up. So I've already shared how you can fix your doctrine about women and you can fix your doctrine about blacks using ongoing direct revelation. So I want to share with you a quick story on the history of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. I do this just to show you that it's not the only incident that we have of doing theology backwards. In Germany, they decided to unite the Reformed and the German and the Lutheran churches in Germany. They were just going to say, you know what? We're going to have one unified church. Reformed, Lutheran, we don't care. One church. And there was a group in Saxony that said, over our dead body, that we're Lutherans. And they got on a boat with their bishop and they sailed to New Orleans. And they landed in New Orleans, got on a paddle boat, and they began making their way against the current upstream on the Mississippi River, stopping along the way and making the trip over time, working their way towards St. Louis. Along the way, they find out that their bishop, I don't know if he had Mormon tendencies, but the bishop was using all their wives as a harem. He slept with all of them. He's gone. They didn't kill him. But they did make sure and oust him. Now here's the problem. They don't have a bishop. They don't have a pastor. Their bishop was their pastor. They can't apply for a bishop to Germany. There's no more Lutherans in Germany. It's a unified church now. There's no Lutherans there. So they can't get a bishop from Germany to ordain their next pastor. They don't have a pastor. And Walther, the first president of the Missouri Synod Church, has a revelation from God. The power of ordination is in the congregation. Now, that may be. My point is that it's a very convenient revelation, since you can't get a bishop and you can't ordain anybody. And it happens to get you out of the predicament that you're now in. It sounds a lot like doing theology backwards. And that's the history of why the Missouri Synod, Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, to this day, is staunchly congregational. The power of the church is in the congregation, almost without accountability. So that's a more modern example of doing theology backwards. So in terms of, as we're finishing up, in terms of benefit of the doubt, there is something in the history of the Mormon Church called the Spaulding Documents, and I list it there at the end. The Spaulding Documents, and basically what they did was they discovered the documents by which they were able to convert made-up characters into English. They found the smoking gun for the translation, and it's called the Spaulding Theory, the Spaulding Documents. And so it appears relatively clear that the reason this is so inconsistent is because he made it up. This is not receiving the benefit of the doubt. And last one is baptism for the dead, which I started with. If you have a dead relative who's not Mormon, and you want to get that dead relative. Now, ask me if this sounds, or see if this sounds familiar to anybody. If you want to get your dead relative into the celestial heaven, what you can do is go to the temple and pay a substantial fee, and you can be baptized on behalf of your dead relative. And your dead relative now gains access to celestial heaven because of your baptism on their behalf. It's an indulgence. You pay for a relative to go to heaven. It's an indulgence. And it's foundational in the Mormon Church. It's what the temples are for, is baptisms for the dead. And they show us the baptismal bath where these take place. So, given credulity and gullibility, given what we just shared, how is this able to spread? Why is this one of the largest churches in the United States, around the world? How did this become a world religion, given what we just shared? And the answer is really interesting, and it works perfectly for postmodernism. It doesn't matter what you tell me. It doesn't matter that the genetics don't match up. It doesn't matter that there's no archaeological evidence. It doesn't matter that the eternal nuclear family is just logically silly. I know that what's in the Book of Mormon is true because I have the testimony in my bosom. And if you convert, you can get the testimony in your bosom too. I have a warm feeling. Therefore, I know it's true. It's called the testimony in the bosom. Now, what I try to do, because I believe the devil is real, and I believe in spiritual warfare, as you can tell by my t-shirt from Ephesians 6, is I try to think to myself, especially when I'm working with and dealing with young people, which I do a lot. If I were Satan and I were planning an assault, what would my strategy be? And I try to do that and try to get a sense of what that might be. And if I were, one of the first things that I would do is convince people that if you have a feeling that I gave you, that whatever I tell you is true because of the feeling. And that keeps Mormons from converting. Not all. That video, those videos are from Good News to the Mormon People. It's an organization of former Mormons who get it. So Mormons do convert. But Satan has effectively shielded them by the simple doctrine of the testimony in the bosom. And what is postmodernism? It's true because I believe it. Truth is based upon my feelings. If I feel that it's true, then it's true. Tailor-made. Tailor-made for subjective relativism. So, questions. Thank you, Brian.
Purgatory. Catholics believe in purgatory.
Yes.
That's through prayer, correct? Is that?
Purgatory and?
Well, purgatory, isn't it through prayer that they're dead loved ones?
No, you give money.
Oh, so that you give money too. Okay.
Yeah. The purpose of an indulgence is to get your relative out of purgatory into heaven.
So you're saying the Catholics follow that?
Yeah, that's where it comes from.
Purgatory, because I went to Catholic school,
Mm-hmm.
you're taught that, so say you lie a lot, you will go to purgatory for all your sins to burn off your tongue. Seal your hands, that's what purgatory.
Jesus died for original sin.
Yeah,
Jesus didn't die for what I did yesterday. Jesus didn't die for what I do tomorrow. Jesus died for my original sin. My sins are burned away in purgatory so that I can enter heaven clean. Unless someone dropped some money for me, then I get a pass.
Wow.
That's an indulgence. There was an article 15 years ago that I did in part of my research, that there was a Catholic church in New York that was selling indulgences in the 21st century.
Selling what?
Indulgences for family members in the 21st century. It's like, have we learned nothing from Martin Luther? They're selling indulgences. That's what baptism for the dead is. That's what I was getting at. You pay money to get your relative into heaven. Yeah. Yep. So purgatory, by the way, quick answer. We entered into the ELCA and the Roman Catholic Church entered into an agreement called the Joint Declaration on Justification by Faith. And when they did that, they signed it, and it was a big thing in 2001. And immediately, Rome, the Vatican, entered an edict saying, the fact that we have entered into this agreement on justification of faith in no way impugns our doctrine of purgatory, which remains. Well, it just totally contradicted it. So the negotiators were coming back to meet on the role of Mary, and they walked in the door. One of the negotiators for the ELCA did this presentation for us. The first thing the theologians from the Roman Catholic Church said when they walked in the door is, look, you know purgatory is not in the Bible. We know purgatory is not in the Bible. We are not going to talk about purgatory. It's not. It's not in the Bible. I'm sorry, Brian, go ahead.
I understand that one of the attractions for Mormonism is the family, the focus on the family. They're healthy families. They focus on having a family home meeting every week, and that's very attraction.
Yep. Yeah, and of course, you get that forever.
Oh, right. Okay.
I mean, that's the key, is as good as it is now, that's how it's going to be forever.
Whenever I see a cool commercial, I say, it's got to be a Mormon commercial,
Yeah.
and it often is.
They are.
So they are really good at slick advertising, etc.
Yep. And their doctrine is, I mean, because of the nature of ongoing direct revelation, paired with what I call reverse doing theology backwards, our doctrine is whatever we need it to be today. So what do we believe? I don't know. What do we need? Well, we need blacks in heaven. Okay. God said. We need women to have full status. Okay, no problem. God said. It's easy. Direct ongoing revelation. And so, yeah. So God said that the nuclear family is going to be together forever in heaven. Cool. That's impossible. Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. I have wondered that for years. I have a stepdaughter and her family are Mormon. When I'm at their house, they said comic books to the preschool children that teach them to indoctrinate them to. We always want to be happy, you know. In other words, you don't, with your parents, you don't disobey them. You want to be a happy child.
Yeah.
And so they're indoctrinated.
Yeah, and like Islam, there's no alcohol, there's no caffeine, there's no drugs of any kind, including nicotine. It's clean. And Islam is exactly the same way. I mean, it is a clean lifestyle that is promoted as part. It's salvation by works. So anytime you've got salvation by works, you're going to make sure that you've got a list of don'ts that you've got to meet, because that's how salvation by works works, is when you've got a list of do's and don'ts. So the result is you've got very clean families, clean lifestyles, because we just don't do that. Yeah.
I have two questions. One is, so do you think, and I'm not a study of any of this, so I think what you're saying is that Joseph Smith said one day, I need to create a religion. I got to start writing down all the details of this religion so I can publish it.
Yeah.
Make it make sense.
Yeah.
Or was he out in this field and had to eat something, maybe some mushrooms that made him a little silly, and he saw these visions and he started to write that down. And
Theoretically possible. The benefit of the doubt argument is that he saw a demon disguised as an angel.
yeah,
And the demon told him all this, and he wrote it down. It's like, oh, cool. And one of the things that happened in the during the first millennia is in France during the Celtics, when the Celtics were in France before they were just isolated. The Archangel Michael appeared to a monk in France and told him to build a devotional for him to honor and glorify the Archangel Michael. And the monks built it. It's there to this day. And now in the first millennium, they didn't have the written Bible. I mean, they had snippets. They had this or that, or pieces of it. So he didn't have 2 Corinthians. He didn't have the whole book of Galatians in the first millennia in France at the monastery. So he did what he was told. That wasn't Michael. Now, did he have the vision? You bet he did. Was it an angel? Did it look like an angel? Absolutely it did. Was that Michael? Of course not. Michael, the name Michael means who is like God. It's rhetorical. The answer is nobody. Michael would never have done that. There's only one angel that we know of that ever demanded to be worshipped.
so how does one know that vision you should have found?
Mainly because of the fact that he was a monk and he got nothing out of it. I mean, nobody remembers his name, basically. I mean, that's part of it. And that's why I believe in the resurrection, right? Because the followers of Jesus were horribly tortured and murdered, and they were penniless when they died. They got nothing other than pain and suffering from their position that Jesus rose from the dead. It's called, I was a lawyer for 13 years before I became a pastor. It's called a statement against personal interest. And the only thing stronger than a statement against personal interest is a statement on impending death. And they had both. So I believe them because evidentially that's really strong evidence. So that's why I'm convinced that the monk had an actual appearance, because there was no motivation for him to build a devotional space to Michael unless he had a vision. There's a huge motivation for Joseph Smith to make himself the head of a world religion. And I shared the urban legend regarding Scientology. The urban legend about Scientology is that L. Ron Hubbard was just at a pub tipping a pint with his buddies and takes a swig from his pint and says, I can start a world religion from scratch. And a year later, the Book of Dianetics is published, the foundation, L. Ron Hubbard, of all Scientology. And what did L. Ron Hubbard do at the time? He was a science fiction writer. He made stuff up for a living. So there's that. And that's why Jim is convinced, and he has studied this his whole life, that it is a mistake to give Joseph Smith the benefit of the doubt. It is a mistake to believe that it was a demon disguised as Moroni. There's just too much evidence to the contrary.
Along those lines, Joseph Smith was a storyteller
Yeah.
back in the day. So
Yeah.
he was used to doing fiction.
Yeah.
But two questions. When did the Bible change to be away from polygamy? Because in the Old Testament there is some polygamy.
There's polygamy that exists, and those scholars who have looked carefully at it have taken the position that God allowed it and limited it. There's also slavery in the Bible. I mean, when the abolitionists started in England and then in the United States, what did they say? Slavery is an abomination against God and against man. And they said, have you even read the Bible? The entire book of Philemon is about slavery. Are you kidding me? In the book of Leviticus, it says, when you have slaves, this is what you do. Have you lost your mind? And that's progressive revelation. That's basically the abolitionist saying, nonetheless, because slaves are created in the image of God, slavery is an abomination against God and against man. So the argument that scholars use is that polygamy was allowed and limited and not sinful. But what does Paul write in the New Testament? Paul in the New Testament to Timothy and to Titus says, when someone is a leader in the church, they should be the husband of one wife. There is nothing unclear about that. And so basically what Paul did was say, all right, let's take this back. Because what did Jesus teach? It was not so at the beginning. But a man shall leave his mother and a woman leave her home, and the two shall become one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined, let no one rip asunder. That was Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. One man, one woman. And so, you know, that the scholars point out that polygamy was a terrible mistake which God limited until Jesus could basically put an end to it, which Paul carried on.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Why do Mormons say Christianity is wrong?
Christianity is corrupt. So they say that the Bible was not written by the apostles. The Bible was written after the apostles died. And the Bible is, they believe, it's a great phrase. They believe that the scripture comes from God to the extent that it is properly translated and interpreted. To the extent that. And that's a Lutheran thing. The reason that the LCMC exists is because the ELCA has reinterpreted its attorney's oath to say, we believe that the Lutheran confessions are true teachings of Christianity to the extent that they are consistent with Scripture. Well, our oath doesn't say that. Our oath says they are consistent with Scripture. But in application, it becomes to the extent that. So that's basically what Mormons teach regarding the Bible. The Bible is the Word of God to the extent that, careful words, it is properly translated and interpreted. And the way to do that is to apply the Book of Mormon to it. Because that's the new translation of the New Testament, their exact words, the newest testament of Jesus Christ. Yeah. So that's how they get around the parts of the Bible they don't like. And Joseph Smith actually translated the Bible, paraphrased the Bible himself, and he wrote his own paraphrase of the Bible. And there are some sects that use it, but Brigham Young decided that for the most part they weren't going to use it because you needed the King James Version to witness to people. And you couldn't take Joseph Smith's paraphrase, which included himself as one of the prophecies in the Bible. You couldn't take Joseph Smith's paraphrase and witness to people that said, wait a minute. So that's why Brigham Young decided to stick with the King James Version, properly interpreted and translated. Yeah.
So if somebody who's Mormon comes and speaks with me, what's one of the solid statements I could make to say, this is why I don't believe Mormonism?
I think probably there's the scriptural approach and the scientific approach. The scriptural approach would be the Book of Mormon is clearly inconsistent with the Bible. And so since the Bible was written at the time that the events happened, and the Book of Mormon wasn't written until the 19th century, I choose to believe the Bible in comparison to the Book of Mormon. That's the scriptural approach. In other words, God is spirit, John 4. So don't tell me that the Father has a physical body. Jesus said, God is spirit and God must be worshipped. God the Father must be worshipped in spirit and truth because God is spirit. And so the contradictions are sufficient. The second approach is the scientific one. Are you aware that archaeology has demonstrated that the Book of Mormon is not reliable? Maybe you don't know that. Are you aware that DNA research has demonstrated that the Book of Mormon is unreliable scientifically? So that works to me.
Comes to my mind that I would probably also say Christianity teaches that there's one God, a triune God.
Yep.
And it doesn't mean that I can become a God,
Right.
that there's trillions of gods out there,
Right.
there's only one God.
Yep.
And theologically, I would stand on that.
I would agree. That's the beauty of the Nicene Creed, because we get the Nicene Creed essentially from John 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. In the beginning means before there was creation, not before there was earth. Before there was creation, the Word was God. So Jesus didn't just show up and become God. So that's what I meant last week when I said that Christianity is the only religion in the history of history that teaches that the eternal God came to earth as a human being and lived and died. Mormonism teaches that Jesus rose from the dead. They have a huge resurrection ministry, but they don't believe that Jesus was eternal God. So they believe in the resurrection. Islam doesn't believe in the resurrection at all. Mormons do, but that they don't believe that Jesus is eternal God when he came to earth.
So they say he died again then?
What?
So if Jesus was resurrected, do they say he died again?
No, he ascended
Oh, he is.
in his God status that he attained. Yep. Yeah, but what came to earth was not the eternal God. What came to earth was a spirit being which became a physical being which attained Godhead and then rose and ascended as God, small g. Yeah. So yeah, the divinity of Christ pretty much takes care of it across the board, whoever you're dealing with. If you're standing on the divinity of Christ, that's it. You can discuss it all you want to, but there's no other religion in the history of history that teaches the eternal divinity of Christ. So the way they get around that is we'll say, well, we believe Jesus is God. Now. Now. Not that Jesus always was, always will be, before all time, Creator God, through whom all things were created. Yep.
And they'd say, and we believe you will be God too,
Yeah.
you and you and you.
Yeah.
So women, even now,
They're not. I don't think they're gods. I don't think women get to be gods. They get to go to the celestial without being married. I mean, if you're a woman and you've been baptized in the Mormon Church, you can go to heaven without being married to a man. Your salvation is not based upon your marriage, but only men can be priests. So I think only men can be gods. They have a spirit wife, so you get to be your husband's spirit wife through all eternity, making spirit babies. The way spirit babies work, by the way, is it's pre-existing souls. So like Islam teaches, like the Kabbalah teaches, there is this treasure of pre-existing souls, and those souls then become infused into people at birth. The soul and the body merge into who you are. But there is this just treasure trove of pre-existing souls. And those souls are populated by spirit gods having spiritual intercourse with spiritual wives and having spiritual babies that then become those souls. So yeah, the pre-existent soul is a big part of that. And if you ever watch the Disney movie Soul, the animated film, watch for that. Watch for that in the Disney movie. The pre-existent soul waiting for a body is part of that movie.
Yeah, it's an interesting movie, actually. It's an attractive movie.
Mm-hmm. Very well done. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's is counter to what, that's what you think, while you watch the movie.
And it's such a popular idea.
Not really right.
There's a lot of spiritisms that have taught over the years regarding the pre-existent soul. And as I mentioned, Kabbalah is one of them. Kabbalah is Hebrew spiritism, mysticism. And people, the draw is, well, it's in Hebrew, it must be of God. No, Hebrew is actually a language. You can actually say pretty much anything in Hebrew. The fact that it's written in Hebrew doesn't make it from God. And that's the heart of the Kabbalah. Yeah.
Now, when you say mysticism, is that